There we go. Bye-bye. It's the Chad Cook Band on 94.3 The Ox. Doing a little honky tonk tonight. 8:29 now on your Monday riding time for Coffee Talk, brought to you by the Comanche Chamber of Commerce and Agriculture. Check them out at #Explore Comanche, Texas. As we say good morning and welcome into the studio, Cynthia Newton with Hope Counseling. Good morning.
Good morning. Happy Monday.
Happy Monday. Well, I would almost believe that. I can't believe we're already here on it.
Well, last week was a 4-day week. So
Yeah.
It's time to get back in the swing of things, right?
I guess.
Hey, if you're working inside, just take advantage
Yeah,
of
well, a
soaking up
bunch
that
of us
AC.
ain't gonna be later. I'll get out there and soak some of it up later on.
I will say I get to work inside all day. So
That's right. You suffer walking out to your car. Oh my God.
I know, it's awful.
It is.
Stay cool today. Stay hydrated. Though.
Absolutely.
But today we're going to talk about generational trauma. I know that's a big word, and you're like, what the crap is that, right? It's like,
sounds like you're going to blame something on the family.
Obviously, you always got to blame it on the family. It's never going to be our fault, right?
That's something like that. It's in the genes.
It's in the genes. But it is, generational trauma is psychological trauma. It can be passed down through families across generations.
There you go.
It can be silent, covert, undefined, surfacing through nuances, inadvertently taught, like maybe not, parents might not be aware that they're actually teaching their children
But it's learned
this.
behavior.
Learned
they
behavior.
see it. Yeah.
Implied throughout someone's life from an early age onward. However, this type of trauma can be caused by a variety of factors, including war, famine, natural disasters, social or political persecution. It can affect the way families interact with each other and can lead to psychological problems in future generations. So this trauma can be especially damaging if it's not addressed and can have a lasting impact on families. It's important to seek help if you think you or your family may be affected by this type of trauma. It can be especially damaging if it is not addressed and can have a lasting impact. Trauma, in and of itself, can manifest itself through stress, anxiety, fight or flight, and other heightened alert systems in our brain. We've talked a little bit about that in the past in our bodies. But intergenerational trauma can also mask itself through, what is it? You said it a minute ago. Learned beliefs.
I was like, what did I say?
Learned beliefs, behaviors, and patterns that become ingrained in our brain. Trauma wiring impacts personalities, relationships, parenting, communication, and views of the world. So, you're like, great, now I'm just screwed up because my family was screwed up, right? No, not really. But yes, there is things that we can pass down from one generation to the next and not even be aware that we're doing this. There's many symptoms. Some symptoms can include depression, anxiety, relationship problems. Sometimes generational trauma affects family dynamics. This type of trauma can cause families to be dysfunctional. Not every family is dysfunctional, and dysfunctional is, a very loose term in this day and age.
Right. But it your own interpretation.
It can lead to tension and conflict between members. This can be especially true for families that have a history of violence and abuse. Self-esteem issues, that's another huge one. People with generational trauma may struggle with self-esteem issues due to negative messages that they have received about themselves from their families. They may also feel like they are not good enough or that they need to live up to the expectations of their ancestors. You think about just negative statements, and it might be something that, again, you go back a generation or two, the way parents parented then is different than how we parent now. But, something that might be said of, oh, you're just lazy, or you're being a brat, or you're being a whiny butt. And you just think how negative some of those connotations are, okay? And, you're just so dumb you wouldn't know how to do this. And people may not realize the long-term effect that some of that can truly have on a self-esteem, especially kids that are really hypersensitive to those types of issues. So trauma can often lead to addiction. We've known this as people attempt to self-medicate their pain. People with generational trauma, however, are at a higher risk for developing addictions to drugs and alcohol. Sometimes people will also develop eating disorders in an attempt to cope with the trauma that they have experienced. That's not surprising, especially if they've undergone any type of weight issues in their trauma. Trust issues. Trust issues are another common symptom of trauma, of this type of trauma. People with this type of trauma may find it difficult to trust others. This is because they have often been let down by the people in their lives, the people that are the closest to them. They may also be reluctant to form relationships out of fear of being hurt again. Memory loss. This symptom is often seen in people who have experienced severe trauma. They may forget certain details about the traumatic event, or they may completely block it out of their memory. This can be very damaging, as it prevents them from processing and healing the trauma. Irritability. Now, this is not just everyday irritability, especially with the heat, but this sign is common in people who are struggling with unresolved trauma. It's like this inner battle that we can't see, but is felt. They may be easily angered or frustrated, and they may have a difficult time controlling their emotions. In anger, this is also a common response to trauma and can be especially intense in people who've experienced generational trauma. People with this type of trauma may often feel they are constantly angry and that there is no end to the anger. Additional symptoms might include nightmares, panic attacks, insomnia, sensitivity to a sensitive fight or flight response, distance and detachment. Distance and detachment. Sorry. I was like, wait a minute. That was the last part. I didn't mean to have anyway, whatever. This Monday. Causes. So you're sitting here going, okay, all right. So what's the cause of all of this? I mean, we already know that this is tied to generational, to families, to genes, to learned behaviors. But some of the more common causes are actually war. The experience of war can be very damaging and cause psychological problems in future generations. Children who see war may develop PTSD or other mental health disorders. This type of trauma can also lead to addiction and violence. Sexual abuse, physical abuse, domestic abuse, all three of those are huge in generational trauma. Children who go through any type of abuse is often going to cause issues with the relationships and family dynamics unless that behavior is corrected or unlearned. And then you can often see that carry. It's what we talk about, breaking the cycle. Poverty. This is a common cause of generational trauma. Children who live in poverty often have to deal with many difficult challenges such as violence, hunger, and homelessness. This can lead to emotional problems and mental health disorders and an inability to understand the importance, again, of from one generation to the next of how to raise your children and how to, support yourself and how to budget and all these things because maybe they weren't taught that. Racism and hate crimes. This is something that we're seeing more of. Again, 30 years ago, barely talked about. But now we're starting to get into generational issues related to racism and hate crimes. Being systematically exploited, enduring repeated and continual abuse, racism, and poverty are all traumatic enough to cause genetic changes. You can see other cultures that might be particularly vulnerable in the United States, and we still see some of that, as well as other choices that people make. So again, racism and hate crimes, we're seeing it still today, and now we're seeing it 3 and 4 and 5 generations into this still, especially in your rural areas. That's something that it's going to take a while to break some of these thought patterns, especially in your rural areas. Genetics. All right, so some experts believe that certain genes can make people more susceptible to developing psychological problems after experiencing trauma. Trauma does affect genetic processing. Sometimes people may inherit the trauma of their ancestors. And that's kind of a weird thing to try to understand, but maybe traumatic events that your ancestors went through that then you have to cope with. It may be something that's related to that you don't even realize that, oh, this is why I am, or this is why I deal with things the way I am.
Sure.
And this isn't really a traumatic thing, but you think about, the 40s and the Depression, and I'm a child of a Depression family. Okay, right. My parents were older when they had kids, and I'm gonna tell you, I was raised, you use it up, wear it out, make it do, and do without.
There you go.
I still teach my kids, but how often? That's kind of gone away. Oh well, whatever. We'll just buy new. I mean, I saved that wrapping paper. You folded it up. You saved it. I mean, some of those things, and we don't do that much now. But I mean, back, that was things that we definitely.
That was the mindset.
That was the mindset. I mean, absolutely, and that's something that you can see just as an example. If you're trying to figure out how this can carry on from one generation to the next, I mean, that in and of itself is a huge thing to kind of think of as an example, and how something societal affected families. Natural disasters. Children who experience natural disasters such as hurricanes, floods, and earthquakes often have trouble coping. They may develop PTSD. Families affected by catastrophes such as the 2004 tsunami in Asia, if we remember that, can possibly have traumatic reactivity for generations to come.
Sure.
Okay. So what's the negative impacts of the generational trauma? There's a lot. Mental health disorders, addictions, eating disorder, relationship problems. We talked about that. Again, learning and knowing what a healthy relationship is can be difficult if you've experienced generational trauma. Trusting, it's kind of like carrying that baggage. You're carrying baggage in it from childhood. And they may be more likely to engage in abusive behavior. Suicide attempts, compromised immune system, okay? And this can this can be that physical side effect. And I'm going to sneeze in a minute, so.
Bless you.
Excuse me. This can result in things like autoimmune diseases or a greater propensity for illness. When high trauma reactive state is in your body, nerve endings, they're triggered, okay? So instead of enhancing growth, they're trying to get rid of the damage. So they're going out from their brain, wait a minute, something's going on. We don't need to be doing to enhance it. We need to be fighting it.
Right.
So that can actually cause a compromised immune system, as well as an increase again in just depression, anxiety, as well as other physical symptoms that you might encounter. All right, so I've told you a little bit about what it is. How do you deal with it? First off, you need to educate yourself. It's important to educate yourself about this trauma and what it is. This will allow you to better understand how it has affected you and your loved ones. Seeking help. If you're struggling with it, it's important to seek help from a professional. Talking about it. Talking about it is huge. I mean, this is something, back in the 30s and 40s and 50s, it was taught, stuff it down. Pull yourself up by the bootstraps. Don't worry about it. Go on to the next thing. And that is the most unhealthy thing, because eventually, as long as you stuff, it's going to come out in some way or somehow, okay? Whether it's through physical symptoms, emotional, I mean, there's all sorts of ways, but talk about it, get it out, journal about it if you don't want to talk to somebody. Support others. You can also support those who have experienced it by being there for them. There's support groups all over the place, especially in the virtual world now. There's a lot of support groups that can help you for this. Make changes in your life that might deal with this. Change your lifestyle, your diet, your habits. This can be a difficult process, but again, it can be very rewarding. So, I mean, basically just be aware that trauma, the whole point of this is to see that trauma is something that's not just, here today. I mean, we're seeing it passed down from one generation to another because of stressors. I mean, we're dealing with a whole generation right now of kids that are going to be called the COVID kids, that are dealing with trauma in and of itself. And, you think about that impact over the next generations and the things that they've had to learn and fight, and the families have had to learn to deal with as a result of that, and maybe thought patterns that could long-term affect some of that when they start raising their children. So just, I mean, that's what you think about is the impact and how it can change your thinking. And then again, obviously the abuse cycles continue to rise, and just being aware of what that truly is. So just be aware of that. As always, we're here to help you at Hope Counseling of Texas with offices in Comanche, Hamilton, Dublin, and Eastland. If there's anything we can do, please don't hesitate to call 325-356-1105. Again, Hope Counseling of Texas, Comanche, Eastland, Dublin, and Hamilton.
You got to rattle them right off.
I did. I'm a little bit further past anesthesia now.
All right, Cynthia Newton, as always, thanks for stopping by.
Thank you.
Wow, have you been to 377bigdeals.com?
Yeah,